Good afternoon, everybody. First off, it's really nice to be here. Rich, thank you for inviting me. As some of you have noted, I come back to this university and I come back to the business school every couple of years. And I have to tell you, I'm delighted because every time I come back, the place seems better, fresher, and the kids look, pardon me calling you kids, but frankly, I think I'll say that a few more times today, so just get used to it. The kids look, better and smarter and more front foot here, so it's absolutely terrific. I may have made a mistake in encouraging the dean to encourage you to kind of press on me really hard today. I've been, quote, retired for about 6 or 7 months. And, when you're running a large company, there are many pressures on you all the time, and you feel pressed all the time. I haven't felt really pressed in 6 or 7 months, so hence the encouragement to you to kind of ask me some really hard questions. I'd like to do 2 or 3 things today. I want to talk just very briefly about sort of the state of the world and state of business, because my own view is when we come out of this slowdown, actually the world is going to be a different place than it was, say, 5 years ago. And I want to just talk about that because, again, as future leaders, you need to understand the world that you are going to be swimming in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's very important that you get that right. The second thing I want to spend a little bit of time on is kind of leadership and my experience in leadership. And some of you may have heard me kind of talk about this, but again, one of the advantages of taking a little sabbatical is that you actually get a chance to step back and ask yourself, kind of really, what was the last 30 years all about? And can you put it in words that might be interesting for the next generation of leaders here? So I want to talk about leadership in particular. And let me just say to you up front, leadership is really hard work. It's not kind of, become an important person, you fly around in corporate jets and have big compensation and hang around with cool people, and, that's leadership. That's not leadership. Leadership is actually very difficult. It's very, it requires a lot of practice. It requires a lot of discipline. And I want to share with you kind of my thoughts on leadership here. And the third area, and this is becoming sort of my pet peeve, again, thinking about this in my sabbatical, is around innovation and how innovation is changing around the world and how innovation is actually going to occur all over the world. And it bounces off of different places in the world and keeps getting better all the time. This is unlike, for example, when I graduated in 1978, when you talk about innovation and kind of things of that nature, people thought about AT&T labs and IBM labs and Bell labs, and that's where the big innovation and the big aha was coming from in the technology industry. Does anybody even know what kind of Bell Labs is anymore? The biggest innovation engine is 50 miles south of here, which is Silicon Valley. And innovation there occurs in a very different way as well. So we'll talk more about innovation, and that's something that I'd like to spend a few minutes on. I'd like to get this done in about 20 minutes. I'll keep a pretty good sort of kind of clip, because frankly, the fun for me is going to be to answer your questions. What's in your mind? If you're a first-year student, then you're asking yourself kind of, what does the world look like? What do I need to do? What do I need to think? If you're a second-year student, you're coming into kind of a little bit of a headwind in terms of where the macroeconomics of the world are today. And kind of, whatever's on your mind, I want you to kind of ask the question so that we can have a kind of deep discussion and an open discussion about, what it feels to be a leader, what it takes to be a leader. Fortunately, I've done business in my career in 40 countries around the world. And because of the service that we provide, which is mobile telephone service and associated products, we've had to interleave ourselves pretty deeply into these societies. So one of my greatest joys is that I've done business in these 40 countries, and I understand these 40 countries reasonably well from a political, social, economic, and business standpoint. So press on me in terms of kind of what may be in your minds about the state of the world or whatever. So without further ado, what do I want to tell you about the state of the world and the state of business? I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is that this concept of G20 versus G7 or G2 is here to stay. The way the world is moving, and if you think about where the incremental GDP is being created these days, 75 to 80% of the incremental GDP today is coming out of emerging markets. And if you say, okay, yeah, but America and Europe are in recession, is that the principal driver? As it turns out, that is not the principal driver. The principal driver is that China grows at sort of 8, 9, 10%. India grows at 6, 7, 8%. Brazil grows nicely at 6, 7%. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. And this is important because, and I'll come on to this in a couple of other segments downstream, is all of you have to feel very comfortable doing business in the world. So for example, if you had a chance to do a summer internship at McKinsey in New York or McKinsey in Shanghai, I can tell you right now, do it in Shanghai. Right? If you have a chance to be a plant manager for a brief period of time in China or India or Brazil or Africa or wherever, I would encourage you to get out of your comfort zone, go do something somewhere else, because actually that is going to be a very important piece of being a leader in the future. You have to feel comfortable in all these different cultures. In terms of pace of recovery, China this year is likely to grow at 6%. India is likely to grow at 5%. Brazil is likely to grow at 3 or 4%. As you know, the United States is going to grow at minus 2%. Europe is going to grow at minus 2, minus 3%. And the Chinas and the Indias are going to come out of this recession slightly faster because they didn't have some of the sort of kind of things overdone, whether it's in the housing markets or in the financial services arena. So what's going to happen is China and India will do slightly better, followed by the United States, followed by Europe. And that's just the way, the way the world is wired and how, things are going to move on from here. The thing that I'm completely convinced of is that as we come out of this slowdown, that businesses around the world are going to be different. They're not going to be the businesses 3 or 4 years ago. Think about customers and what customers are valuing these days. I think there's going to be a much greater premium on value. It doesn't matter what segment you're in, whether it's financial services, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's internet, whether it's health services, whatever your segment is, value is going to be a very important thing. Think about customers today. They want more environmentally friendly products. My view is that's going to be another important theme. So as you think about the businesses that you're interested in and businesses that you're likely to be working in, think about customers differently than one might have thought about them in the past. Technology is changing very dramatically. It's incredible to me, how quickly the internet and communications and all kinds of technology are enabling the delivery of these services in a different manner. If you think about regulation, regulators are going to play a much bigger role, again, in these businesses. Think about the financial services industry and the level of regulation that they're likely to have in the future. Or even the mobile phone business or the internet business from privacy points of view. You will see, and this is, again, a global phenomenon, that regulators will play a more important role. Competition. There's competition coming from every direction. It's local competition. It is international competition. And so the reason I'm kind of going through this just in a little bit of detail with you is so that you understand that as businesses come out of this recession and senior management have had to make difficult decisions about hiring and firing and all of that, that the way they would like their business processes organized for success in the future are going to be different from what you've seen in the past. Keep that in mind as you further your careers in whatever field that you choose. I'm going to switch gears here, and happy to talk more about the state of the world, but let's go on to leadership. So, for the longest time, this is at least for 5, 6, 7 years, when I've talked about leadership, I've highlighted 3 things. One is, to be a good leader, you have to be a good strategic leader. Second, you have to be a good operational leader. The third is you have to be a good people leader. And the big deal about leadership is you have to be good at all 3 simultaneously. Strategic leadership would be around the ability to look at things in sort of a very clear-headed, analytical way and say, well, these are the forces that are acting on my industry or my business, and this is how the cookie is going to crumble, and we're either going to have to kind of get into new products, or we're going to have to reduce cost, or we're going to have to go international, or we're going to have to do this, that, or the other. And since I'm talking to a group of MBAs, it would be sort of kind of McKinsey-esque, as it were, which is the ability to think clearly. I don't mean PowerPoint presentations with arrows. I mean the stuff that's actually behind that, right? Which is sometimes missing. But the point would be, it is that headset. It's the headset. It's sort of understanding microeconomics well. It's understanding, businesses well, and being able to kind of look through the various threads of the needle that one has to kind of take through. That ends up being a tremendously important thing, because you are going to lead 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 or 300,000 people. They expect their leader to know where the world is going. The second part is to be a good operational leader. And what I mean by that is that you have to have the ability to have great performance. Because, this future stuff is 2 years out, 6 years out, whatever it is, but you've got to produce your quarterly results or monthly results or weekly results. And that ability is actually quite a different ability. The ability to be able to organize, incent people, and kind of monitor things, stay on top of things, and make sure that you have great performance over a period of time. And what I find interesting amongst a lot of people is some people are really good strategists, and there's some people who are very good operational people. They love the detail, and they love to stay on top of stuff. But sometimes the two don't come in the same package. The first package is about, I'm very clever, I'm very smart, I can talk really well, I can give great presentations, but you ask me to kind of organize and produce something, I can't do that. What's that? That's almost intellectually slightly kind of beneath what I'm expected to do. Equally, you get some people who are very good at kind of taking care of customers, following up, following through, day to day, all of that stuff, but actually can't think about the big picture. And what I'm highlighting to you is that both of these end up being equally important. And of course, in business schools, it is the former that we all like because it's cool, it's big, it's about forces in the world and all of that, as opposed to, did you take care of your customer? The customer called you, had a complaint on a mobile phone. She wanted a new phone. Did you actually make sure that that phone was put in a FedEx package so that she could get it tomorrow, right? It is the ability to go back and forth between big strategic ideas and the ability to get your basic job done every single day. Every single day, especially as you kind of go through management ranks, is about taking the washout every single day. And that ends up being quite an important thing. The third thing is around people leadership. And people leadership is the ability to get a group of people fired up about a mission, and being able to align people in a way and empower them in a way that they want to take that hill that you want them to take. That ends up being a tremendously important skill. Hiring good people, creating great teams, motivating, incenting, because people like to follow people that they sort of believe in. And this is just not sort of an analytical belief, it's about somebody who understands and can show the direction, and getting people to do things that individually they may think are not possible. but collectively, it becomes entirely possible. So, kind of getting everybody to perform at the highest level in their game and then collectively doing sort of great things. That ability is a pretty unique ability. It requires a certain level of humanness. It requires a certain level of ability to distill trust. It requires a lot of things. And again, I find that some people are very good natural managers. And now I've got the third leg of the stool. You've got the great strategist, and then you've got the great ops person, and now you've got the great people leader. And the big deal about leadership is being able to do all of those three. You just can't say, listen, I'm a great people leader, I can excite everybody, I can tell great jokes, but at the end of the day, I don't know how to think strategically. Well, I'm sorry, that's not going to cut it, right? Or, boy, I'm really, really good at ops. I can really take care of my customers, and I hit my numbers and all that. But frankly, I'm sort of kind of Attila the Hun, and people are scared of me. When I enter the room, everybody wants to kind of leave the room. So it is this ability to do strategy, ops, and people things simultaneously. And one of the things I want you to do is kind of ask yourself, on that scale, how good are you? I know some of you are going, got that nailed. I'm ready to be a CEO. Right? And some of you are sitting there going, well, holy smokes, yeah, maybe I'm really, really brilliant, because the dean told me that the average GMAT scores have certainly gone up since I was at school here. And so the point here is that you should assess yourself, but this is a long-term journey. And you will have a chance to practice your strategy skills, you'll have a chance to practice your ops skills, you'll have a chance to practice your people skills. Take those opportunities. Because actually, if you sat there saying, super, 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 you need to come talk to me. I really want to talk to you. Because actually, you have to practice this for a period of time. And it's not just a self-assessment that you think you're so good at these three things. It is actually the people around you who think you're good at these three things. But obviously, people around you are not going to think that you're good at these three things if you yourself are not confident or you are not exhibiting these things, right? So it is a long and complicated journey. The only thing that is really important at this stage is that you start asking yourself, if you're not as good with people, well, then take on more people opportunities to lead something so that you can build teams and you can see how it feels to be a team leader. It's not always easy. If you haven't had a lot of opportunities in actually operating something and kind of doing the daily wash stuff, then take those opportunities in your career, early in your career. And this is about building your portfolio over a period of time and getting really comfortable with those things. Now, what I've said up until now is something that I have said. I say it to my employees. I've said it in other fora. There's this sabbatical thing has got me thinking about one more thing. And now that I think about it, we were actually doing this in spades at Vodafone. And that is the ability to work cross-culturally. For all of you who are graduating now in the next couple of years, like I said, the world is changing. 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to have innovation, you're going to have operations all around the world. I can hardly think of any big, great global company today that doesn't operate in 20, 50, 100, 200 countries. You're going to have to be able to operate in all these environments reasonably comfortably. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden you need to change your major from business to either linguistics or kind of travel, from country to country to country. It is more about who you are and how you perceive people from other cultures and being able to test. So, for example, if you took an assignment in China, nobody's going to expect you to kind of be a fluent Mandarin speaker and know everything about Chinese history and culture and all of that. But it's not important that you know that as much as that you have the right attitude with people, and you have the right understanding of humanity, that you respect people at the core. If you respect other people, it's going to be very easy. You could be drop-shipped in India or Africa or the Middle East or Latin America, and you might not know much about their cultures, but as a human being, people can look at you and say, well, either you're sort of kind of stuck up, or you're actually a pretty easy person, and you might not know the local culture, but hopefully you're coming there with some domain knowledge. Your domain knowledge is good, and your basic humanity is good enough that people would be attracted to wanting to make you successful. The core point here is actually, at the end of the day, it's other people who make you successful. You don't make yourself successful. It's not, you can't stand up and say, listen, it's me, right? See me, feel me, touch me, heal me. It's not that. It's others who say, this guy is seriously good, or she's seriously good. And they are the people who take you up in an organization. If, pardon the expression, I'll be sort of kind of crude. If you're a jerk, people will pull you down in 2 nanoseconds. So the point here is about, and the thing here is that the difference is that the world is going to change in the next 10 or 20 years. You have to be comfortable operating in these cultures. Now, you might say, God, this is I came to business school to understand marketing and finance and all of that. Now you're putting on another layer of difficulty here. And first of all, you don't have to become a world expert in all of this in 2.5 months. There are plenty of opportunities for, even on this campus. There are lots of international kids. International House sits here. If you're ever bored someday, or you need a cup of coffee, go have a cup of coffee, and you'll end up sitting next to somebody from Europe or Africa or China or India or Middle East or Latin America. Have a cup of coffee, ask them about who they are. If you're not comfortable, now some of you may be absolutely very comfortable, and I'm preaching to the choir here because you're today's millennia global kids. So you have it all. And if that's the case, listen, that's terrific. But all I would say is get to know the world a little bit, because I can hardly imagine any of you 10, 20, 30 years from now without having had substantial international experience in whatever field you choose to pursue. John, is that enough on leadership, or you want me to keep going? Okay. Let me change subjects. Innovation. So I think the big thing in innovation is that, what I'm finding is that innovation is now happening all over the world. So you might say, how do you define innovation? Is it, the number of patents that are produced? How many patents in the US, how many patents in Japan, how many patents in China? Frankly, that was sort of the old way of measuring innovation, and I'm going to drop that. To me, innovation it could be business model innovation, it could be product innovation, it could be the old kind of science-y innovation, the patent version of innovation. But, I'm seeing innovation everywhere. And one of the reasons for you to be comfortable doing business everywhere is because innovation is coming from everywhere. And let me give you one example of an innovation that I think will crystallize what I'm saying. And I call it boomerang innovation. We are all here. We understand the products and services here. At Vodafone, a couple of years ago, we bought a company in India. And everybody said, understand, you're going into India because large population, low penetration, you'll make a lot of money, sounds good, 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 check, 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 and that was terrific. But if you ask me kind of what I was most intrigued by was the cost structure in India is 1 cent a minute is what it costs us to produce a minute of cell phone service. And in America and in Europe, the number is 10 cents a minute. We use the same technology, all GSM-based technologies, but there's a huge cost difference. And frankly, what I wanted to do was understand, because, 60% of Vodafone's profits come from Europe and the United States and all of that. I want to understand kind of how come these guys produce a minute for a cent while it takes us 10 cents. And you can say, what, lower labor rates and lower this. Even after you kind of cut through labor rates and, in the telecommunications business, labor is not a huge portion of the total cost component here. But whatever it is, I was curious about what actually happened. So, in typical big company fashion, we sent out our best ideas to India, and we said, take all these ideas about how to put, put all the towers onto one tower, all the physical assets, and so on and so forth. And before you knew, the local teams had taken all the great ideas and changed them to suit the local market, which was fantastic, which is good, but to the extent that, frankly, they are now leading the world in something called sort of active infrastructure, which is not only did they put all the kind of the physical stuff on one pole, but they put all the electronics, put all the spectrum and everything else and integrated it. And they did it because they wanted to reduce cost. The government kind of encouraged them. And in a lot of these societies, scarcity is a big thing. Everything is a scarce resource. Here in the United States, we've got 30 megahertz of spectrum. In India, we've got 6 megahertz of spectrum. And so when you've got small amounts of spectrum, you've got scarcity value, necessity ends up being the order of the day. And they have kind of very cleverly pieced a whole bunch of things together, which we are now, frankly, importing back into Europe and the US, saying, that's a really smart idea. It helps us reduce our costs. This is what's going to help us reduce our costs from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6. So this notion of boomeranging ideas, you send a great idea there, but be prepared to receive it in a slightly different way. And that sense of innovation is absolutely pervasive. There's a new car that's going to be unveiled in the next month or two called Nano that gives like 65 miles per gallon in terms of fuel efficiency. There are electric cars being developed in China. I assure you that the Chinese will be among the leaders in electric cars 5-10 years from now. The reason to keep pressing on this again is that it's a global marketplace. And you have to operate in this world. You can't say, listen, I really like the world of 10 years ago. I want to go back to 10 years. Sorry, that time has come and it's gone, and you're going to have to operate in this world where things are boomeranging, innovation is happening everywhere. You have to be attentive to cultures and understand these cultures. By the way, go ahead and answer the phone. That's revenue. And so these are sort of kind of tougher times. It's going to take that one too. These are tougher times that you're going to be managing in. They're more complex, but as the dean says, you're smarter. So it should be par for the course for all of you. So my own view is that I'm actually wondering if it's my phone that's ringing. I don't think so. But at any rate, so that's kind of what I wanted to say to you. I'm very happy to answer questions about culture and values in companies. We haven't had a chance to talk about a lot of stuff. I'm very happy to take it on a Q&A. But be passionate about what you do. Don't worry too much about this near-term economic slowdown and all of that. This has happened. There are good and sufficient reasons why it happened. We'll come out of it. The world's not coming to an end. Be positive. Think about the longer term. And in closing, I'd just say, kind of make the world a better place. The reason to have responsibility and quote, power is so that you can do something good. It is not to kind of have companies blow up, go to jail yourself. Those are not the objective functions. The objective function is to make the world a better place. So let me start with that, and Dean, back over to you.
Wonderful. We do have time. Thank you, Arun. It's your time. Please use the microphones for those of you that would like to ask a question. Please, sir. Microphone. Do you have one over there somewhere? No. Sure.
Following the slogan of Haas School of Business, I'd like to ask you if you could briefly address these two questions. One on the leadership. What do you think happened in this financial crisis? It was definitely a problem within the leadership of this country as well as other places. And with innovation, yesterday I was watching on KQED a documentary about North Korea, and they really did a whole technological development, and they are considered the most wired place in the world. But that has not really helped the country. Now they're having kids addicted to the internet and not productivity at all. If you could address those two, that would be nice.
Very good. Kind of what happened here, again, I'll try and be brief, but, the core problem, in my view, stems from easy money. For the last 5 or 6 years, we've been mispricing the cost of capital. Starting with the Fed, frankly, that had a lot of money available. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I have friends in the private equity business, and they used to laugh at this covenant light amount of money that they were getting. They were getting a lot of money with virtually no covenants. And that caused everybody to kind of pay enormous sums of money because the covenants were light. People thought they could make easy money. In the whole housing mortgage business, there was a systemic problem with people sort of kind of overselling to people who didn't really afford or couldn't really afford these homes. And of course, we saw this phenomenon here in California and a bunch of other places, together with a slight sense of sort of heads I win, tails you lose, which is taking on bets. You think about all the hedge funds and you think about all these guys like George Soros and all of that. I mean, everybody took on massive bets. When the bets paid out in the first year or two, they were written up in the annals of journals of finance as geniuses, that they had called this absolutely right, and they were all taking home $1 billion a year in paychecks, and they were heroes. But many of the people who took these bets also got them hugely wrong, and hence the problem with the balance sheet of the banks. And this started 5 or 6 years ago when, through Glass-Steagall limitation removals, people went from sort of kind of 10, 12 times sort of leverage to 40 times leverage. Just think about 40 times leverage. If you're wrong about your asset price by 2.5%, you're dead, essentially, right? So it sounds extreme. And the question is, the regulators weren't paying attention, greed was a factor, heads I win, tails you lose, quote, financial services innovation and CDSs and CDOs, and frankly, nobody really understanding what was going on, especially in these derivative markets. I'm still on the board of the Bank of England, and I have to tell you, and I talked to the governor several years ago, and we'd say, kind of, what is the total risk here? Nobody could quantify what the total risk was. And I think the Federal Reserve here, the Bank of England in the UK, and other important monetary policy institutions have been very good on the monetary policy side, save my comments about money being too loose here, but actually have not done a good job on the financial stability side. So I think those things cumulatively created this problem. Like I said, this is a problem. It's going to take a while to kind of wash through. But it will wash through. This is not a catastrophe. This is not the world's coming to an end. This is not the end of globalization. As much as people will now say, well, is globalization good or bad or indifferent? We can have that argument. We can have a discussion. There are parts of it that are good. There are parts of it that are bad, have to be managed and all that. But you can't stop globalization now. It is on a track that will continue. Along the way, you can have a little bump and a little protectionism and this and that, a little bit of hand-waving, but at the end of the day, It's too late. The world has been wired in a certain way. People have experienced the benefits of globalization, and this will continue on. To your second question about Korea and the fact that it's a very wired society, both in terms of kind of bandwidth and wireless and so on and so forth. I think, in general, wired societies will, in the long term, have greater economic production. You haven't seen it in Korea because it's a little bit like saying, the benefit is going to occur in 10, 20, 30 years, not in 3 years. And you're sort of kind of looking at it in 3 years and saying, well, all I see is addiction with games and all the other stuff that goes on the internet. I actually haven't seen any productivity. My own view is that the way we are going to organize our lives in the future are very much based on having broadband and wireless at the same time. And those are two important pillars for economic production in the medium to long term, meaning kind of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Gentleman in the back there. Good leadership is about doing those 4 things now well. Strategy, operations, people, cross-culture, right? Doing all of them well. There will be times in your career, if you become kind of a salesperson for IBM or Goldman Sachs or whatever, I mean, the thing that they'll be measuring you on there is whether you produced, $100 million worth of revenues. Did you meet your quota, right? That's okay. That's part of your career. But you, at all times, even when you're meeting that quota, as it were, you're going to have to keep the other 2 things in mind, which is, you're leading a team. Are you a good team leader? If you're thinking about the future of what it is you're selling to your customers, are you being strategic about that? So my view is there will be many times in your career when you'll feel like you have to make a decision. Do I meet my quota today? Do I press hard on my people and say, I don't give a you-know-what, get this done by tonight, right? And there'll be times you kind of go, yeah, I've got to be tough here to kind of get this done. But at all times, keep those 3 or 4 things in mind. It's not a kind of a binary answer. It's this or that. It's not, can you walk or chew gum? You're going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And there will be times when on the margin, you're going to have to sort of kind of, say I'm going to hold off on the strategy or going to be a little tougher on my people. The question is, why do you have to be tough on your people? Was it that you weren't guiding them along all the way and you come at the last moment and you say, why isn't the proposal ready? Well, boss, you didn't tell us, right? So it is keeping that in mind but doing the job that you have to do. Gentleman in the white shirt.
What is your biggest leadership mistake and what did you learn from it?
First of all, there were many. So I'll tell you, I think, the biggest mistakes that people make are on the people side. You assume, you think that you're working with people who will be aligned and will produce and all of that, but they end up not being aligned and not producing. And then, that good human spirit in you says, well, why don't I give Joe a little more time because of whatever. Because I've known Joe for 10 years, because, you and Joe were colleagues in the past and you became the boss and now Joe is sitting under you and you want to be slightly softer with Joe. You end up taking a long time in coming to people mistakes. And if you ask me, most of the mistakes that I've made have been around people. And it's much easier to stand here before you and say, put the right people in the right job, this, that, and the rest of it. The point is, most times you're being served a group. It's not like you're starting by yourself and you're bringing a team along. You're being served a group. And you have to lead that group. And it's people mistakes. And the mistake is not dealing with the issue sooner. Now, this sounds really tough, but let me tell you, I wish I had fired some of the people that I ended up firing a year earlier. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. It's not that they're, quote, bad people. It's just that the mission that you have, that the organization has, is not being helped by their presence. Because if they're not aligned, because if they're not producing, frankly, everybody knows that they're not aligned and not producing, except you, because you keep wanting to believe. I believe that Joe will actually come through, right? And everybody in the organization knows that Joe is goofing off, he's not doing the job, he's not aligned, and yet the boss is, quote, just protecting him for whatever set of reasons. So my view is, when you have to take people decisions are easily the hardest decisions. Strategy decision, get into India or not to get into India. How hard is, it's hard, but, it's not like, yes, you do have to meet the Prime Minister when you do these kinds of things, but it's not like there are lots of human faces that you associate with that decision. Once you've taken the decision, you've got 10,000 new employees in India. That's terrific. But strategic decisions are easier than human decisions. Human decisions are the hardest. People firing decisions, I think, are the hardest amongst the people decisions. Because when you're hiring somebody, you can do a number of things to kind of test whether the person understands the mission, the vision, has the values, will be a good team player and all that. But when somebody's not performing, calling that decision earlier is the recommendation that I'd make to you. And it's a hard thing to do. It's, again, much easier to talk about it than actually doing it, because you're affecting the life of another human being. In the back. First, I have to say that the job of a management team is to maximize shareholder value. Okay, but that doesn't mean that you don't do good things for society. We used to put 20 million pounds, which is roughly, it's less these days, roughly $30 million. Today's exchange rate, 1.5. I've been watching it carefully. Away every year for the various foundations that we had all around the world, where we would partner with our local exchange, our local company, and do good things in Africa, or do good things in India or China or Middle East, or frankly even here in the United States. We've got a foundation that just gave a lot of money to some entrepreneurs who have some great ideas about how to kind of use technology and innovation around the world. My own view is that the less I talked about it and the more I did quietly, everybody was sort of kind of okay with that. So one of the privileges that you have when you get to be a leader or a chief executive is you can do a number of things that actually nobody, if I had gone and made speeches to the city and said, listen, I'm putting away $30 million a year for this, that, and the rest of it, there would have been at least 5 shareholders who would have written to me and said, this is not your money, this is my money, and you don't do anything with it. My view is, yeah, technically I don't disagree with them. It is the shareholders' money. But the thing you have to remember is that if you take a brand like Vodafone or any of the great brands, what do you do when you're helping society, especially when your product is so interleaved with society? You're building good, sustainable societies for the long term. We took some of this money and we, in Africa near Soweto, we bought, containers, shipping containers, and put a whole bunch of phones in them and created little entrepreneurs so that they could sell mobile phone service to the folks who lived there. And before we knew, that became a little shopping mall, and before you knew, we had broadband there, and they were thriving little centers. Now you tell me, at the front end of it, it would have felt like, why are you doing this? Why don't you return this money to me? At the back end of it, it's a perfectly good thing to do, because healthy societies have healthy consumers, have healthy businesses. So I find it, when you get into a pure intellectual argument over it, I can see the shareholder point of view. But my own view is that just do good. Nobody, it's like in the old days, if you bought IBM, nobody was going to scold you for buying IBM. If you're doing good, nobody will ever scold you for doing good. Just do it. Now, I'm not suggesting you do it and get yourself into a lot of trouble, but I am suggesting, there are places to sort of kind of break the rules, as it were. This is a place where you can break the rules, and nobody is going to say, and you gave money away for a good cause? And you go, yeah. Okay, gentleman in the white shirt there.
As a successful leader, you have to understand exactly what your strengths and weaknesses are, and keep yourself honest, and work on things to develop yourself. Over your 30 years of careers, how do you account for what your strengths and weaknesses were and keep on developing? What were the things that you did? I have had personally problem with understanding some of my weaknesses, in terms I'll find out in a few years or in a little bit of time. How do you keep yourself accountable and understand exactly where you stand and what are the things you need to work on?
Yeah. So it's a very good question, because frankly, we all develop over 10, 20, 30 years. And the people who develop well are the people who are self-critical. Meaning, if you think you're perfect and nothing can be improved in you, then I don't know where to direct you. But like most of us, when you'll be part of teams, your teams will give you feedback that, you're too tough, or you don't explain things clearly enough, or whatever it is. My view is take that as good feedback that you can then go work on. So a lot of the learning comes from having good mentors, people who are observing you, who are saying, you're very good, but you're really impatient. You need to give your team a chance to kind of get it, as opposed to directing them all the time. Or whatever it is, listen to your mentors, listen to your supervisor, listen to your people around you, listen to the people who work for you, and keep a sort of an open head about this, that you're not perfect and that you are trying to improve at all times. If you've got that headset, management in life ends up being about a headset more than anything else. It's not about skill, because the skill that you have today, or knowledge that you have today, will be relevant for some period of time, and knowledge keeps moving on. It is the ability to constantly change and learn and absorb and take feedback and take feedback and give feedback and take feedback and give feedback. It is that constant balance that you go through that makes you better. But it starts with your genuine desire to be better. A lot of people say, I want to be better, 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 then they reach sort of kind of middle management. They are, this is too hard. Be better all the time. In my case, my wife was very critical of me in terms of telling me, kind of what I needed to do better. My children, they are completely critical of me. So I've had a lot of people who've called me to account along the way, and frankly, I feel like I'm better for it.
Last one.
Gentleman here. You want a mic? You must have something really important to say.
All right. I'd like to say, actually, thank you for the great speech and all the good Q&A. But last question, I guess, is more personal to your earlier years of life. I was wondering, growing up, did you have trouble with other people really believing you and really listening to like your goals and ambitions, or your whole thing about like leading, thousands upon hundreds of thousands of people around the world? Was that more recent, or did people be like, all right, come on, stop talking about owning big companies, stop talking about doing big things, start thinking realistically? What was it like?
Well, ever since I was 5, I was talking about leading a large company. Listen, I mean, take you back to your shell when you're 20 or 25 or 30, and you're doing what all your contemporaries are doing pretty much. And then you kind of develop over a period of time into the person that you are. Now, if you asked me, did I have kind of internal aspiration to do more? Yeah. But did I broadcast it to all my MBA classmates that, listen, one of these days I'm going to come back, I'm going to be the chief executive of a big company, and you guys disagree with me on this, but I'll tell you who was right? No. I mean, they would have thrown me out. So, so my view is you have these aspirations. You think, you actually don't know if you've got the right stuff. You actually don't know. At your age, at 25, I hope many of you get to be CEOs and big shots and whatever you decide to do. But you actually don't know. Because life is funny. It takes interesting turns. Sometimes you catch a lucky break. Sometimes you don't. And so my view is stay really grounded. The first thing I'd say is stay really grounded. Who you are, what it is you want to do, have aspiration and ambition, but don't wear it on your sleeve. Nobody wants to know when you're in your mid-20s that you think you're going to be chief executive of Goldman Sachs. Okay, nobody wants to know. You may be a really smart kid, but your peers certainly don't want to hear that because they may be working for you. So the thing is, stay grounded, move one step at a time, and keep assessing. Does it make sense? Yeah, then you go to the next level, and you go, yep, things are feeling good. And while you might have a long-term goal, you have to have kind of short-term goals that kind of take you in that general direction. So you can't leap from here to there. Most of you will probably have, 7 to 10 jobs before you will reach the final destination, whatever your final destination happens to be. So have these intermediate goals and do a really good job in every assignment that you get. So don't be thinking about, I want to be CEO of Goldman Sachs when you're kind of on the trading desk, or you're carrying the bags of, the senior investment bankers or whatever it is. When you're carrying your bags, carry those bags well. You have to be a very good follower to be a really good leader. If you don't know what good followership looks like, you'll have a hard time with leadership. So my view is use the time, 5, 10, 15 years that you have, do a smashing job of whatever assignment is given to you. Keep asking yourself, where you want to end up, and keep that in mind in the background, not on your sleeve, but in the background, and just keep doing well. And like I said, the hardest thing in large companies is getting through middle management. Because middle management has a lot of layers and a lot of things can go wrong in middle management. And if there's any advice I can give you is see if you can get out of middle management as quickly as you can. Right? Because in middle management is where great people get just churned up. There were lots of kids I graduated with here, who all on the face of it looked like they were all going to be, stunningly successful. But then they got stuck in middle management and just couldn't come out of middle management. So my view is head down, do a good job, have a good attitude, be pleasant, be successful, make others look good. It's not always about you looking good. It's making other people successful. And then there's a certain momentum that kind of takes over because, like I said, you don't get to choose the top job. It's others who choose you to have the top job. But outside of that, I've been thinking about it since I was 5. Listen, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.